All right, welcome back to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today it's time for more Wheel of Time, back to the fires of heaven. Um, and we are on chapter 13, which is page 254 in the paperback. I'm gonna try and push through a big chunk here to get back to the kind of the main storyline of this book, Rand and Mat and Egwene. So we've got a lot of Elayne and Nyneave, and then I think it switches back to Sawan for a little bit um, before we get to I think it's chapter 20 where it switches back. All right, so chapter 13. All right, let's just start off with getting ourselves in trouble. Um, because the the first thing we see, and it's only going to get worse as other things happen down the road, is catty women, which I guess we're not allowed to show or talk about anymore because female characters can't have flaws.
Uh, if it's an all-female cast, they can, because
I
then you
suppose
have no
so.
show.
Well, yeah, but then that's why things like Ghostbusters 2016 flops, or the last Oceans movie they made, where for some reason they decided let's have it all chicks this time. Uh, and it just goes. The Charlie's Angel movie. There's a good channel called Filminto, because he's a screenwriter, so he comes at it from that perspective, and he did a good one on Charlie's Angels, just laying out with scenes of what happens when your characters are perfect. It's boring. There's nothing for them to do. There's nothing for them to accomplish. It's why Nynaeve starts out as one of the more annoying characters and becomes a fan favorite because she has flaws, because she's annoying.
Stick with me here though, because you can't have conflict with women now in modern
Hmm.
entertainment, but they have to fight like men.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what we're seeing with the Lord of the Rings. Well, I shouldn't call it that because it's not the Lord of the Rings. It's bears absolutely no resemblance to anything that Tolkien wrote. The Rings of Power, uh, and they forced Galadriel to become a warrior rather than what she was, which was already impressive. So much so that the characters, the male characters within the story, were in awe of her, and she was a fan favorite of the
Even
of
one
the
with
side
racial
characters.
prejudice was in awe of her.
Yes, that's a very good point. That it wasn't just his friendship with Legolas that broke that barrier of animus between dwarf and elf. It was his meeting of Galadriel and how
Because
in awe of her he was.
right before that meeting, he makes before they're basically taken in,
Mm.
uh, kind of captured in that scene. He makes a derogatory comment about elves to Legolas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, and that's the kind of power, that's the kind of presence she has. And now she has to be a warrior, literally leading armies and slaying orcs and doing it better than all the men who suck at everything. Um, and that's not these characters. It's why they're so good. It's why you can have a, 13 book series and keep people engaged the whole time. Um, because the characters don't become boring. In fact, our primary complaint really where the story tends to fall short is when we don't get enough of the characters. When he gets too many and they start to get short shrift, and so it's like no,
Which
we
is
need
one
to
of the
know more
beefs
about
with the
these.
series, the show,
Hmm.
because despite what Whoopi says about it's fictional anyways, our beef wasn't the diversity. Yeah, there was a little bit of the force diversity, and we
Hmm.
don't think they got the best cast, but the narratives they had to force in there that took away from the story, that added to it when there's already limited screen time to put this in. You
Yeah.
know, the infamous one is the Swan and Moiraine love relationship. That was what, a 15-minute scene in a 60-minute episode. So a quarter of 1/8 of the whole thing was taken up
Yeah.
with this fictional thing that they put in there just for diversity and
And
inclusion.
contrast that with their first meeting in the books at the beginning of The Great Hunt, which we spent a lot of time on because it's such a good scene. It's such an impactful scene. You get a lot from it, um, a lot more than the cheesy pandering that we got in the show.
Yeah, again, if it was purely we got these actors and actresses show up for the auditions and these were the best ones and it ends up a diverse cast, we would be completely on board.
Hmm.
It's the changing of the stories, it's the in your face, you must accept this because we're going to take something you already love and you don't get it. You don't get this thing you already love unless you take this other thing that we want you to accept.
A prime example of that is House of the Dragon. I had to stop watching videos on it because I realized, you know what? I'm gonna want to watch this at some point here. So I had to stop watching videos on it because it was sounding and the scenes I was seeing were looking so good. And people have forgotten that when the trailers first came out and you had black Targaryens, people were going, hold on, wait a second. And of course they were all they were all racist, but I've mentioned before the Nerdrotic channel who's pretty good, and he's a big uh book nerd. He's read all of the books by George R. R. Martin. And as he pointed out, no, the problem with that guy is that the Targaryens are very stingy about their bloodline. That's why there's so much incest. So, and that particular character there in the book is rumored to be a bastard. Okay, well, it's not a rumor if he looks that much different than all the other Targaryens. So that was the criticism of, hold on a second, because of this first forced diversity, you're creating problems. But then the show comes out, it's incredibly well written. The acting is incredibly well done, so you're getting all this nuance and all this depth that we didn't get in the Woke of Time, and we're not getting in the Rings of Power. And now all of a sudden people are singing its praises and they don't really care about the forced diversity. They don't care about the female empowerment narratives because those narratives are just a narrative. And these strong female characters are also flawed characters. So you can have your diversity if that is incidental, if that's just an element to your casting, but it isn't the focus of your message. Go back and watch our prologue to the series, and we called a lot of the crap that we thought we were going to see, and it was primarily because all of the pre-airing of the series was all about the messaging. And if that's all you're focused on, we knew, okay, well then you're not really paying attention to the story, are you?
Mm-hmm. Another good example of a show that did it kind of right is you look at the fourth season of Last Kingdom. You almost don't notice the diversity they just thrust in there, even though it happened in the fourth season of a show that was already established. You almost don't know it except for one character who's really, really forced in there. But other than that one, it just the show goes on. It was just going, and even the girl power stuff. One of the antagonists to the main character, she's a badass when she's fighting in hand-to-hand combat, but she does it like a girl.
Mm,
She doesn't just face toe to toe and go sword to sword with people, or very rarely. She hamstrings people. She stabs people in the back. She takes them out with a bow when they're not looking.
yeah.
Her power was not that she was just as strong as the men. Her power was that she was ruthless and
and
cunning.
and, and you get that in the Wheel Time books because Jordan writes the maidens differently than the other Aiel. They fight like a wolf pack, where they're smaller, so they make sure they outnumber their opponent. You see that a little bit in the when we first see them in the Dragon Reborn, when they rescue the girls, because they surround and they dart in and jab and then dart back.
Which we can actually put this in my wheelhouse, because when you look at sports, watch girls teams versus boys teams. Boys teams, they get the captain of the team, the hierarchy of ability that goes along with it, the who's helping the other players. Where the girls teams, it's all chance, it's all togetherness, it's all we're one thing. And if there's overlap, obviously, as we always say, disclaimer, overlapping bell curves here, but listen to a girl softball team with their little sayings and chants that they're constantly doing, and the one girl doesn't join in, they kind of go cliquish.
That's a good example, because when it first started, I enjoyed watching women's Olympic hockey more than the men's hockey, because I'm in awe of people with skill that I have tried and can't do. And I could skate well enough to not fall on my butt and hurt myself and embarrass myself, but you know, I'm not a great skater. And to watch the agility of the women and the way they move the puck versus the more straight, generally speaking, straightforward power of the male hockey players was much more entertaining to me than watching the men's hockey. But getting back to the book before I get way off track.
Yeah, I just wanted to give that one example just because I was reminded of it watching my niece's softball game versus helping coach my son's baseball team. You develop these as men,
Yeah.
these mini hierarchies, whether you try to or not. One person stands out as the captain of the team, and in fact, a lot of times they vote on that person.
Mm-hmm.
And at the youth level, you kind of give everybody a chance to see who's going to come out of it. Uh, Whereas the girls, it was all about, we're this one unit and we're the tribe.
Yeah, and you can see that when you have a co-ed team, because the um when when I was coaching my kids when they were at the coach pitch level, it was co-ed teams. They didn't separate off into baseball and softball until they got to the kid pitch level. So I was coaching my son and my daughter on the same team, and you would see that with the way the girls would congregate together and the boys would congregate together, because girls are grody at that age, and they act differently, um, which sometimes leads to cattiness, which is a thing. I mean, stereotypes develop for a reason, and you you especially see that with these personalities, because Nyneave is already prickly, and then to have to subjugate herself to Elayne, even if it's an act, um, and Elayne, gets her own scene here. We've kind of mini ranted before that we feel she falls off in the later books, but she really stands out here with her um she has a degree of humility. She is inherently arrogant because she was raised in a palace as a princess with the expectation that one day you will be the queen, because this land has always been ruled by queens. So she was raised with that expectation, and yet she has the friendship and the humility to tell Nyneave, darn it, I offered to scrub your back in return. I offered to sleep in the trundle bed, and you wouldn't have any of it because you're so darned obstinate. And Nyneave gets her own development because, I mean, she has trouble admitting it, even later when she has kind of her arc starts to come to fruition, but she's able to recognize that, yeah, I'm acting like a child when Elayne calls her out. And so she never really admits that she was wrong, but she stops doing what she was doing, which is kind of her thing. Is she's, until much later, she's not going to admit that she was wrong, but she at least has enough self-awareness to stop doing what she's doing. And then they meet the menagerie. And she causes more problems by being both stingy and haughty. It is an interesting dynamic, and I have to think he did this on purpose. The the commoner raised in the backwoods Nyneave, the raised in the palace Princess Elayne, and yet they both have their own haughtiness.
Well, they got it in different ways.
Exactly.
Nynaeve had to fight her way to the top, and Elayne was born there.
Was born there, but then had to secure it, had to prove it. Much more so later, obviously. But even at a young age, she knows she has to live up to those expectations.
But as we see with a lot of the other noble women, though, a lot of that was the way she was raised, not her born position. More has to do with her mother and Linny, and to some degree Gareth as well, than it does to do with her birth and her place in life.
Exactly. Yeah, she was raised much differently than, and there's a sharp contrast between her and other noble ladies. So she gives him a penny. Now I'm just kind of gonna jump forward a bit.
Is this where he throws it back at them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she just gives him a penny. Well, I guess they go to.
With those shoulders, a good day's work would not kill him.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't skip too far forward because they do have a meeting in. Okay, yeah, I was gonna skip forward to Galad because that's one of the things that jumps out at me. But they do meet. Nynaeve does meet with in the next chapter when she goes to Celeron Reread. She does meet with Birgitte again, or however you pronounce her name.
Well, this is the one that doesn't have. Oh no, it does. It's just this is one of the books that Hamilton tried to eat. So luckily, he only got the
I always forget the syllable at the end. Birgitte. Birgitte. Yeah. Well, partly because there's two influences here to Birgitte. There's a Welsh Celtic heroine, but there's also a Birgitte Germanic Scandinavian.
Because without the extra syllable in the end, it's the German pronunciation of Bridget. But then you add that little bit that would make it the
and I think she's more the Celtic because as I recall from looking it up a million years ago, the Celtic heroine from mythology was an archer, so I think she's heavily influenced by that. But one of the simple things that Jordan does that becomes so obvious in rereads because it's so terrible nowadays is he doesn't tell you obvious crap and he doesn't treat the audience like an idiot. So we've met her before. We know she has had interaction with and she wants to help Nyneave even though she's not supposed to. And he just jumps us back into it. So we assume that they've been in contact before, but he doesn't feel the need to give us a summary of what's been going on. He just jumps us back into it. And then Birgitte mentions that Gaidel Kane has disappeared, so he's probably been reborn, which leads to all manner of speculation down the road and to this day because I don't think it's ever really been confirmed.
Yeah, and he kept saying that it was not certain people.
Yeah.
But then he would also say that, well, time works differently. So he
Hmm.
could have been born earlier, but still been in the world of dreams. And so he kept throwing those other things out there because uh, we met the kid yet?
No,
Okay, so that's
no,
spoilers.
we
Uh,
meet him in the next book.
so there was that one, but also there was people throwing out that he was Matt, and I'm like, no, no, no.
Yeah, that's a little too much there. And
Well,
we've
especially
already got,
since Jordan did say Matt was somebody else.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, Jordan liked to troll the audience. And one of his favorite phrases was read and find out. It
Mm-hmm.
became an acronym on the boards. And according to people who would go to book signings or whatever and ask him questions, he would often say it with a cheeky grin. And we're going to, at the very end of this book, we're going to get to the perhaps most infamous mystery of the entire series, which he literally said that he didn't think it was going to be that big a mystery. And when it turned out to be, he enjoyed trolling the readers. That's why he let it go on so long and wouldn't ever give an even remotely straight answer to questions pertaining to this particular mystery, which, we'll get into either in spoilers or just when we get there. Um, uh, he does give us hints here. So on page 273, when Birgitte and Nyneave are talking, um, this is another one of those things that makes this book so infinitely rereadable. This whole series is, we get in the prologue, and we touched on it because when we talked about the prologue, but we kind of beat around the bush, and we talked a little bit more about it in spoilers of the meeting between the cabal or conspiracy of Forsaken that Lanfear is leading, um, to ostensibly capture Lews Therin, and he never goes back to it. So far as to the best of my recollection, we never even get another Forsaken point of view in this book. We start to get a lot more in the next book, but I don't believe we ever even get another Ravine point of view, and he's kind of the main Forsaken in this book. But Birgitte references it here, where she talks about seeing uh, is it uh too many. Lanfear is often in Teleron Riyadh, of course, but I have seen Ravine and Samael and Grendel, Demandred and Simmerhaj. Um, None of them have seen you, Nyneave, blah, blah, blah. I am not so unskilled or so foolish as to allow that. Birgitte leaned on her silver bow. Legend said she never missed with that bow and her silver arrows. They are concerned with each other, not anyone else. I have seen Ravine and Samael, Grendel and Lanfear, each stalking the others unseen, and Demandred and Simmerhaj each shadowing them as well. I have not seen so much of them here since they were freed. So she kind of references that group that we know about, because Lanfear and Grendel and Ravine and Samael were part of that kind of cabal from the prologue, and so he gives us that, the little hint of, hey, remember this thing? Okay, now let's move on. He's just kind of reminding you, hey, remember this thing I set up? Yeah, I set it up. Don't forget it. Okay, now let's move on while I don't give you any additional information.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was looking for the influence for her character,
Mm.
and uh, it's kind of difficult because Google keeps pointing me to the sexist themes of Wheel of
Oh,
Time
good golly,
articles.
Miss Molly.
Yeah, so I'll get back on task here.
Um, and then he set up and pay off some more. Nynaeve asks Birgitte if she can find Malhidian. Um, and I'd forgotten this little tidbit on 274 that her nickname, her taken name as a Forsaken, that was what a Malhidian had been in the Age of Legends, a tiny spider that spun its webs in secret places, its bite poisonous enough to kill in heartbeats. So I like that little tidbit that of where these names come from, because some of them, like Samael is a derivation of I believe it's a Canaanite god, is where it comes from. So you get some of that. Uh, but I like when we get the references because of the whole circular time that um these are myths and legends that even we would be familiar with, but they're twisted and wrong because it's the passage of time just changes what people say and what they think they know. Um, let's see. So we get the little setup there of Nynaeve asking Birgitte to see if she can track down Malhidian. Um, So I think the kind of next interesting and integral thing of this chapter is page 279. Um, where she's talking to Egwene, do the best you can. Helping him hold on to himself may be the best thing that anyone could do for him and the rest of the world. Um, that produced a silence. She and Egwene certainly did not like to talk about the eventuality of Rand going mad, and Elayne could not like it either. Um, we've kind of ranted about this a little bit in spoilers of how we think this is one of the biggest lost opportunities, but it makes me think he did it on purpose, to kind of keep the drama going, which I think is kind of a shame because that's um so the the wife is watching a new show. She mostly watches Chinese or Korean dramas. And she keeps ranting about the terribleness of this new show she's watching, but then crying that she can't find anything else to watch. And the reason it's so terrible is because it's so contrived, because they keep having these coincidences between the two main characters, the woman and the man, who are obviously going to eventually be love interests. They keep having these these coincidences so that they keep meeting, so that they keep having drama, and it's incredibly contrived and incredibly boring. Um, and that is where I see a little bit of a failing with Jordan is every once in a while. But again, the reason the series is so constantly rereadable is because this happens very seldom where you see something and go, is this really a natural outgrowth of the logic of the world, of the setup, of the characters and the storyline? Or are you doing this so that you can continue to have some drama and suspense? And I feel like sometimes I feel like keeping Nynaeve away from Rand for so long is a bit of a contrivance to keep the drama going. Because, and this is where, you know, our one and only member of our fan club, Scott, is so adamant that he doesn't like Egwene, is because though she professes to be a friend and a one-time love interest of Rand, she very quickly loses that friendship arc and very quickly becomes a creature of the White Tower, of the Aes Sedai. Is she's no longer Egwene of the Two Rivers, you know, friend of Rand since they were both children, right? And she's now um now, specifically right now, she's part Wise One. And so she's kind of with them in her view of how Rand has to be handled. Nynaeve consistently is concerned about Rand the person. It's one of the things that makes her such a sympathetic character. Because almost everyone else, it's why we can't wait to get to the scenes where Min joins back up with Rand, because she again is one of those few characters who sees Rand as a person and is concerned about him as a person. And it's purposefully and obviously and logically a sharp contrast with how everyone around him sees him and acts and, you know, reacts to him. And I kind
Well,
of feel like,
according to this author of the Four Sexes Themes of the Wheel of Time, that's
oh God,
reason number 4 is it's his fault because he can't handle powerful women and she's becoming more powerful. So that's why they're growing apart. It's not
no, it's not because they have different agendas and different worldviews and different forces pulling on them in different directions. No, it's because she's strong. Oy vey. Yeah, yep. It, you know, as opposed to his love interest Elayne here, who's a freaking princess and will soon one day be queen and is one of the top 3 strongest channelers known in the, well, at this point, top 3. Later on, I would say she's probably top 5. Anyway, moving along. That kind of broke my brain.
I'm good for that sometimes.
Yeah. I believe this, so the next chapter, chapter 15. Now, this is the first time they start doing this, of snooping around in the world of dreams to get information on the waking world, the real world. But we've seen this before.
I was going to say we saw that in the Pinarch's palace, but
no, that's a good point.
yeah,
yeah,
they were just so clumsy at it there.
But that was specifically based on the wise ones talking about need with a capital N.
But didn't they go in there more than once they knew they needed to be there to try to keep figuring out what it was that was in there that they needed to find?
That in that scene, she shifted multiple times to get closer and closer to what it specifically.
Oh, I thought there was visits after that, though.
Well, there was a visit before with Egwene at the very beginning of the Shadow Rising, where she did it accidentally, where she went to Chanchico accidentally, and that's where Amos found her. But where we see the dream world being used for this purpose first, outside of Egwene doing it accidentally, is Perrin. And this is another one of those things that's very lightly set up early on, and it doesn't pay off till way down the road where they come together, is that Perrin and Egwene, and by extension from Egwene, Nyneave and Elayne, are learning / stumbling their way through the world of dreams, whereas Perrin has a more instinctual grasp on it because he is being taught by an animal. He is being taught instinctually because that's how Hopper views it. He doesn't view the world of dreams as any different from the real world. And so he's learning in a different way. And so he doesn't have these constraints that other people might have because of how he's learning. And so it takes it takes Nynaeve and the others kind of a longer, more circuitous route to get to here. Um, all right, so page 287. Here's another point where we should give a shout out to Scott, who hates Egwene. And this is probably one of, not probably, this is one of the justifications for why people don't like Egwene. The way she treats Nynaeve here, when at this point she kind of has reason to set Nynaeve down in the same way that Elayne had reason just the previous couple of chapters to yell at Nynaeve and tell her she's acting like a child. But Elayne had a lot more justification because Elayne wasn't being a hypocrite. Because Elayne, as she said, had offered to switch places with Nynaeve, and we don't have to carry on this act of lady and her maid in private. You're the one who keeps doing it. Well, Egwene's being really hypocritical here because she's shouting at Nynaeve and she's threatening her. She
Mhm.
terrifies her with this kind of creation of a bit of a nightmare to kind of scare Nynaeve straight, which is necessary and is true, but she's putting on airs because Egwene doesn't know nearly as much as she thinks she does, and she's avoiding the fact that she's not supposed to be doing this. The
Mhm.
wise ones have very clearly said, you don't go into the world of dreams without us, because there are too many dangers and you don't know enough yet, and we need to teach you. Um, and this is where the rest of the world, the other characters, find out that Elaida is now the Amarillen's seat.
Hold on. Oh, sorry. I had you talking and then you talking at me because I was bringing up the last episode so I could have the comments. So did you just ask if I had more comments?
No, I was talking about Elaida being the um the Amarillan, and so now we find out what that message about loyal sisters returning to the tower was all about. Da, 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 da.
It's funny because it's you were talking about Egwene. It I think it kind of grates at us guys a little bit
Mhm.
because we do a similar thing, but it's less covert. So, like I talked about natural hierarchies and captain of the team and everything. When you see the captain coming down on the number two, then a lot of times you see the number two come down on number three. But this is like the behind the back version of that.
That reminded me of something, but then it reminded me of something else too. I think it was a USA Today article. I don't remember, several years back, one of the last seasons he was in New England, there was this big article about Tom Brady and the Patriots. And one of the things that jumped out at me that I remember most about it is the journalist talking to Randy Moss. And so for all the people who ask about, was it Brady, was it Belichick? The answer is yes. Okay. Belichick's style worked because Brady was all in with it and was as focused and driven as Belichick was. And so Randy Moss talked about the most shocking thing to him that told him, oh wow, this place is different from anywhere else I've ever played, is the first film session he went into. And this was in training camp, And Belichick put up the previous playoff game where they'd gotten beaten by, I don't remember, it might have been Pittsburgh that year or whatever. And Brady didn't have a great game, but he rarely has a terrible game. And Belichick just lit into him about the crap, the terrible decisions, play after play of, this is bad because what were you thinking here? And Moss said it wasn't that the coach lit into the starting franchise, multiple time MVP, Super Bowl winning quarterback. That was shocking enough. He said what really shocked him was the way Brady took it. He didn't just sit there and take it. He agreed. He was, that was crap. That was bad. I need to do better. And that is what let him know that, oh wow, this is a different kind of place because of that dynamic, that the coach, the top dog, the leader, and the way he interacted with the number two, and the way that negativity was reinforced to create something positive, to create a drive of, we need to do better. But the first thing you made me think of when you were talking about it is something I meant to mention when we talked about Catty women, which we'll get into more, I think, as we go through the Elayne and Nyneave storyline. But I had this thought of kind of an illustration. How often do you complain to your wife about your friends? I'm going to guess not very often.
No.
Because males will tell their friend, you're being an annoying asshole. Stop it. How often do you have to sit there and be an open ear for your wife to complain about her friends? This is kind of where exactly. This is kind of where catty women come from, because this is how they act, because they are more passive aggressive. They tend to they have those personality traits and types that, even in that opening scene, how long, Jordan kind of lays out that they've been traveling for a couple of days now, and all of this stuff has been building up before Elayne finally has her outburst, which kind of solves the problem because she finally confronts it. Well, women typically take longer to confront the issue, which is where the outburst comes from.
I was watching an interview with Franz de Waal, who is behavioral biologist, one of the four founders of the field. And he talks about a swimming coach he knew, college level swimming coach. And she stopped coaching females to coach males. And when asked about why she did that, she said, well, because at the beginning of the season, if the guys have a fight, they have a fight, and then they're good by the next day.
Mm-hmm.
With the girls, if they have a fight, that fight is the whole season.
Oh, yep.
This is a female swim coach, not my words. YouTube.
Yeah, and just keep that in mind here as the relationship and interaction continues and changes between the three main female characters, because we get a little bit of the setup for that here at the end of this chapter, page 296, when it switches to Egwene's point of view, and so you get that explanation from her perspective of, holy crap, I can't believe I got away with that.
Well, let's go to the three boys, because let's be fair, right? We have some interactions with the three boys where they're bickering in book 2. Mm-hmm. Pretty much the last time they were all together in a good setting, maybe except for the Stone of Tear, which they kind of were separate but together in the Stone of Tear. But when Matt is getting on to Rand about being the Dragon Reborn and how he's going to go crazy and kill everybody, and then Perrin stands up to Matt, and then Rand is like, well, he's right. And they have this thing out loud to each other, mm-hmm. and we don't see a whole lot of conflict between them. And when we do see it, it's resolved like that. Anything prolonged between them, like you see some between Perrin and Rand a little bit, is because they're apart.
we will get into that a little more. Book 7, Crown of Swords. Perrin and Rand get into a bit of an argument. Um, and in large part, it is because they have not seen each other for so long, versus the dynamic between the three women who, even though they're widely separated, they can all travel to the world of dreams, so they can all stay in contact and they all meet with each other regularly. Um, so page 300, Egwene's we start to see even more of this transformation of Egwene into an Aes Sedai, where she lies without lying to Moiraine, because she's telling Moiraine about what she saw in the dream, but can't let on that it was her walking around in the world of dreams. So she leaves the impression that it was a dream with a capital D, a prophecy dream. Um,
Well, and we have another commenter on the last episode, Frank Blaskowitz. If I mispronounced that, give me a phonetic in your next comment, where he defends Egwene a little bit on how she
mhm,
actually, some of the good things she does with the tower. But I think where at least I'm coming from, and pretty sure Scott's at least in this ballpark too, is it's not that she didn't do good things for the tower or change it in some ways.
mhm,
It's that she, just like in her moment with Nyneave a few minutes ago, is slightly hypocritical in that she became the thing she actually hated about it,
yeah.
which is what she's doing here. I hate that they manipulate people and bend the truth. And she quickly learns how to bend the
She
truth.
she just manipulated Nynaeve, and now she's bending the truth with Moiraine. Yeah,
And then
yeah.
goes on to preach about following the three oaths, even though she hasn't taken them.
Well, the biggest problem to me, well, I'll leave that alone because that's going to be way later, and I don't
Yeah,
want to get into the spoiler
we'll save
section.
it for spoilers. Yeah.
I will say, even here, where you can make an argument both for and against is, so in this scene particular, she's going to Rand because he needs to know about this thing, even though it does endanger the tower, because the prestige of the tower, the idea of the tower, is even more important than the literal truth of the tower. And so to let the world know that it has been split would be a big effing deal. But Rand needs to know. So there is still some of that I care about Rand part to her, but where the duality with Egwene comes is she's already kind of starting to lose. That's kind of what I was trying to point out with when she was talking to Nynaeve there with Melaine, is she she's already starting to act like someone with an agenda versus someone who's still a friend to Rand but just happens to think differently. Like Matt and Perrin um don't really have agendas. They disagree with Rand, they conflict with him sometimes, but it's a difference in perspective, not a difference in agenda. And that's where Egwene starts to become kind of a dual personality when it comes to her impact on the main storyline.
Yeah, I don't know. Agenda can be a loose term because Matt just wants to get away from it all,
Yeah.
you know, and he just it's funny because he wants to get away from it all, but he was raised better, unlike in the series. Uh,
Uh,
and then Perrin wants to protect home. It just so happens that many things happen because of that.
well, he just wants to protect. That is, I mean, home, friend, family, that is his priority, but one of the great things about him that is such a consistent character arc is he's a protector. Just
Mhm.
period.
But then Egwene has developed. So those are their identities. Matt's free. Matt is I am me. I am nobody else's.
Hmm.
Perrin is I am me, but I am obligated because I'm the big strong one
Yeah.
to protect these people. And Egwene has adopted the identity of I'm going to be an Aes Sedai. And if you have that mentality, then the tower is paramount.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to get to this real quick, because you brought up the stupid show and the crappy pandering lesbian love scene, and it made me mad. And there's another great example here. Like I brought up the meeting of them in the Great Hunt, but there's another great example here of why Moiraine is such a compelling character and why she's such a strong character. Uh, when Egwene tells her about Siwan, who they assume has been executed, stilled and executed here. So page 301. Is that all you can say? I think Siwan was your friend once, Moiraine, and lover. No, no, that's not true at all. Can't you shed a tear for her? The Aes Sedai looked at her, and that cool, serene gaze told her how far she had to go before she could use that title herself. Sitting, Egwene was nearly a head taller, and she was stronger in the power besides, but there was more to being Aes Sedai than strength. I have no time for tears, Egwene. The Dragon Wall is not many days' distance now, and the Alguina. Siwan and I were friends once. In a few months, it will be 21 years since we began the search for the Dragon Reborn. So Rand will be 21 in a couple of months, just as an aside, because we're always talking about time
Yep.
frames. Only the two of us, newly raised Aes Sedai. Siren Vayu was uh, Siren Vayu was raised Amaryllis after, a gray with more than a touch of red in her. She had learned what we intended. Had she learned what we intended, we would have spent the rest of our lives doing penance with Red Sisters watching us even while we slept. There's a saying in Karheen, though I have heard it as far away as Terrebonne and Saldea. Take what you want and pay for it. Siwan and I took the path we wanted, and we knew we would have to pay for it eventually.
Student loan debt.
But that just that little paragraph says so much about Moiraine that we never get in the series. For all of the fact that she was the main character of that first season, not Rand or anyone else, but it was her. She was the main character.
Which
And
is funny because if I was to play devil's advocate, and then I'm going to blow this argument up, if I was to play devil's advocate with the show, is they, so many stories now, they want to show you the human behind the hero, right? And that Moiraine here is kind of robotic in her obsession with the with their goal, and she becomes inhuman because friendships are human nature. And so there's so much obsession nowadays with entertainment to show the human behind the hero. But here's where it gets blown up is, there's a such thing as a workaholic. There's a such thing as a single-minded individual that is so obsessed with a certain goal or task that they neglect everything else in their life. And to apply that to someone who's completely convinced she's saving the world, I mean, I think that's pretty reasonable. It's a single-minded focus that is probably required for that job. We go back to sports. How many times did we see a guy in a Hall of Fame career and he gets married? And it kind of derails.
Well, I brought up Tom Brady earlier, and he's having all this drama now because he retired and then unretired, and the rumor is that Giselle is not happy. And so how is that going to affect his play? How has that affected his training?
Not only
and all
that, we just you don't even have to go that far. Just is the fact that she's not happy because he was laser focused when he was playing and she felt neglected.
Yeah.
To back to our point, just being hyper focused on something. maybe she felt like, well, I'm married to this guy. He's famous, and I wouldn't want to be married to anybody else, but he's not my husband during the season or during this part of the off season or along those lines.
Yeah. I'm tempted to go off on a tangent of gender dynamics there because there's a lot to say just with that little bit. But let's get to chapter 16 and 17. I want to just try and move through these two chapters real quick before we get to spoiler sections.
I don't think it's an argument of gender dynamics. I think it's a fact that if you're in that stage of your life, maybe it's not the best thing to get married.
No, because men tend to get that way much more than women. And I think that's a part of the fact that women are generally more able to multitask, which is good, which is a very good thing to be able to multitask.
More
but it's also a very good thing.
Multitask.
Yes,
there's a difference between able and apt.
Yes, that's a good point. But
like
there's
I tell one of my clients when she's messing up when in the gym, I say, your grocery list doesn't matter right now. Focus on what you're doing.
But there's also a reason why Nobel Prize winners and inventors and all of that tend to be men, and it's not because of sexism. It's because men are more apt to focus in on one small thing, which is what is required to get to that level for
some
that
of us
thing.
have to focus on one small thing just to let the tension
just to get
out
that
for
release.
The day.
Yeah. Wait, what? What are we talking about? Speaking of hot guys, I mean, so the reason I wanted to get to these chapters here is Galad, because we meet him again, and we're gonna get even more of him later. And it's kind of a reintroduction, which I really like. And I've mentioned this before, that one of the interesting things about Galad's character arc, even though it's kind of small because he's a smaller character, is the fact that when we first meet him, really all of our understanding of him is coming from a biased narrator, because it's coming from Elayne, who does not like him. But then we actually meet him here, and well, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily want to be friends with him because he's kind of stuffy, but he seems like a good guy. What's your problem, Elayne? Because when they first meet him, he is, back to the focus, laser focused on, I need to protect you. What are you doing here? I need to get you back to Mother. I need to get you back home. But then he also has the awareness and the instinct to protect Elayne when this friend comes up and wants to be introduced to these hot ladies he's talking to. And he deflects and he steers the guy away so that they will be left alone. And Elayne is still so biased against him. And I have to wonder if it's because she kind of came from a broken home. For all of the good raising she had, she never had a father. She only had a father figure who was subservient to her, technically speaking. The high general of the army. Brian's a big effing dude, but she's still the princess in the air. So she has this kind of reflexive disdain for Galad, and is completely consumed by the fact that we can't trust him not to, bundle us up and take us off on his own. But he just did something that, by your characterization of him, he should have been incapable of doing. Because she frames it as a negative of, paraphrasing, that Galad is being faced with something he's never been faced before. Two things
that are right,
that are contradictory, and yet he is certain are both right. Because Elayne is his sister and the daughter heir, and he is sworn to protect her, and he wants to protect her because he is a gentleman, and and a brother. But he's also now a white cloak, and it is illegal to be tower trained, not just in Aes Sedai. It is illegal to be tower trained in Amadicia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also right that he should follow the law and arrest her. Okay, so yeah, that is a problem, but you're painting that all in the negative and giving him no credit for the fact that he just broke the law.
It's a good example of again, we don't get it till we get in his head later,
Mhm.
but it's a little bit of dissonance because if he was 100% bought into the white cloak ideology, it wouldn't matter if she was his sister and he was sworn to protect her and all of these things. He, we've seen it with religious zealots
Well, the
in
most
history of all humanity, no matter what the
yeah,
religion,
and the
you
most
know, and
extreme example here is Child Buyer, who's,
yeah.
I mean, a full-on sociopath. That he just does not have any empathy or sympathy for anyone he considers a dark friend.
Well, and I'm trying to remember who. I think wanted to say it was one of the Forsaken that killed his whole family that they talk about in one of these, uh, giving his history. But then we got uh Carradine, and I guess that is a slightly spoiler, but he's protective of his family,
Yeah.
later.
I want to
So
say that was Lanfear talking about Asmodine and telling Rand not to get too comfortable with him.
yeah, I'm wanting to say that was the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um did you have any thoughts on Galad? That was pretty much all I had on these two chapters. And then stuff happens. It's good stuff, it's fun stuff, but mostly it's just stuff happens.
No,
But to me,
the
the most
good,
interesting part is Galad here.
yeah, the good Galad stuff is when we get in his head.
Yes.
Because then you see him trying to reason through everything. And I think Jordan does a good job. And then later on, a little bit of Sanderson does a good job of this is where one character I'll give Sanderson credit with is he to say, okay, well, this is right in this way, and this is right in this way. And they like you said, contradictory rights. But at the same time, there's something very wrong here. I can't quite put my finger on it. So I'm gonna kind of lean to this side, but I'm not going to discount this other thing until I've completely investigated it. And so you see a lot of that internal reasoning that he does. And so this is interesting, but it gets much more interesting with Galad later.
Yeah. The only other interesting things I think in these two chapters is that we meet some elephants.
Yeah, pretty much.
So,
horses.
Four horses and a Sanshin.
What is it with fantasy writers and elephants? Tolkien did it. Jordan did it. They always like try to take an elephant and put a twist on it.
I think it's a combination of them being exotic, but also imposing. Because they're so big and powerful, and then you have the mythology and the history and the lore of them as war elephants, and there's a lot of that in history, and Jordan was heavily influenced by history, military history especially.
Well, I've gotten more interested in elephants because, again, reading and listening to Franz de Waal, who studied elephants and actually studied animal intelligence in general. And his book, let me get this right, it's called something to the extent of, "Are we smart enough to know how smart animals are?"
Huh.
And
Interesting.
If you change the sensory feedback of the puzzle, other animals all of a sudden show a higher IQ. And elephants, here's your trivia for your random drunk trivia nights out there, everybody, except for Scott because he doesn't drink. So I guess Frank, if you enjoy a drink or two, here's your trivia for trivia night. An elephant has 100 times a better smell than a dog, and they are exceptionally intelligent. So it's
their brain is huge.
Yeah, and they're talking back and forth that they might even be smarter than dolphins. But again, it's hard to measure because they're smart in different ways with different senses.
Well, I didn't quite get as far as I was hoping to, but the next chapter 18 and 19 are kind of tangents. that we should be able to cover relatively quickly. But I've got a hard out, so I'd like to pause there and then let's get into spoilers.
Right.
All right. So before we get to the comments from our last Wheel of Time discussion, one of the things that I enjoy about the reread discussion, and I hope we bring to the whatever audience we have, because it's a reread, you notice different things, you point out different things jump out to you. And something I thought of when you were talking about Galad that I don't think I've ever thought of before is Jordan is laying a very complicated web that will eventually bring Galad and Perrin together. And I really think that is absolutely on purpose, because when you were talking about Galad, it occurred to me, oh, he's Perrin. They have a different you know, they are different in personality in a lot of ways, and yet they're so very similar in other ways. It's just that Galad is very concerned with doing what is right with a capital R, but he's also very concerned, and what separates him from other children of the light is that he's very concerned with making sure that what he's doing is right. He wants to think through, okay, is this right? Is this the moral thing to do? Whereas Perrin
He's
is
willing to question the dogma enough in the face of the ideal of what it's supposed to stand for.
Yeah. Are we am I living up to the ideal? Because he always wants to and thinks everyone should strive for that ideal. And we do get enough of his perspective to realize he's not a dummy. He knows that there is no attaining the ideal, but you should strive for it. Whereas Perrin has a similar thought process, but he's much more convinced that he's on the right path and he knows what is right and moral, and he's more concerned with making sure that this is the best option that I'm doing. But they do follow very similar thought processes when you get their points of view. Especially in the previous book, one of the reasons we like it so much is that deliberation that Perrin goes through when he's trying to figure out what to do, what's the best thing to do, as I try and defend my home. But there's no question in his mind that defending my home is the right thing to do. He's not thinking about turning himself over to the White Cloaks to face execution, knowing full well he's facing execution because the White Cloaks are the guardians of light and it's the right thing to do. No, it's the best thing to do what is right, which is protect his home and family.
So you're saying Perrin and Galad are twins and Gawain is Danny DeVito.
Yeah, that works.
Oh,
that works. Oh, geez.
Of course, aren't they making a new twins?
Please
in the light of what we've been talking about with in the new Hollywood recipe, take something that was successful before and make it diverse and inclusive. Because apparently there's a black twin, is what it is. It's like Tracy Morgan or something like that.
I had a big argument with the wife the other day because we were watching TV because it's football season, which meant I had to be subjected to stupid commercials, which meant I saw NBC was rebooting Quantum Leap.
Oh yes, that one jumped out.
Quantum Leap is practically a perfect show. It still to this day stands up. All right. And she was adamant, no, there's so many new things and directions you can go. No, you can't. All you're going to do, and all they showed in the series was you're going to bring up what is history. So much of Quantum Leap was, 50s and 60s and 70s, and now you can do things in the 80s. You can have him looking in a mirror and seeing he's Joe Montana, or you can have him waking up in a C-130 about to jump out of jump out as a paratrooper in Desert Storm. So you're not changing anything, you're just showing new things and changing who the main character is. It's wholly unnecessary.
And it's funny because in Quantum Leap, the original, the way they played it was, yes, he would leap into this new body and it would be a different profession or different all of these things, but he was solving a personal thing in their life.
Yes.
Whereas this one, he's got Joe Montana right before a game. You think he's going to go out there and play like Joe Montana?
Yeah, the whole point was to fix something that was wrong because there's this glitch in history, and because of this personal problem, Joe Montana ends up losing this game, having the worst game of his life when it was supposed to be the best game of his life. And then he would leap out right before the game, in that kind of example.
Oh, okay, that makes better sense then.
But from the commercial, it
He's
looked
already
like
suited up.
he's suited up, he's about to go out, and he's just realizing he's Joe Montana, which would be in stark contrast to how the original worked. So he would leap into people who weren't necessarily famous, although they might have been, but they were about to do something famous and historic. And he had to make sure that this personal problem, it really was personalizing history.
Mhm.
It's why books like this work. It's why historical fiction and historical movies work so well and are so impactful, is because people like history. They don't like being taught history. They like personalized history. They like the personal stories. It's why the Diary of Anne Frank is so impactful and is required reading because it's hard to wrap your mind around the staggering numbers of the Holocaust, but we can talk about a teenage girl going through teenage girl things while she's having to hide from murder squads. And so you have personalized the history.
What spoilers were we jumping on?
I mean, the main one I had was talking about Galad and Perrin and them meeting up eventually. I don't think I had any others. I don't remember anything jumping out at me. I don't know if you had any.
You said there's no Forsaken points of view. I thought we got
I
some
couldn't remember.
Asmodean at some point.
You get a snippet of Asmodean in the end. You get a snippet of Ravine when he's fighting Rand. But I don't think you get anything like the prologue again, where you have a longer scene, because you get a lot of Ravine's character there from his point of view.
Well, I don't have anything on spoilers. Nothing jumped out at me because with the ladies, we kind of touched on Egwene a little bit just because of her hypocrisy, and I think that you spelled out an instance where that's really going forward, and it helped me narrow down my own thoughts on why she grates at me.
Yeah,
because it is that she bitches and moans about this being the problem with the tower, but she's also becoming it.
yes.
In,
But
in
well, it's why one of my favorite scenes in the whole book series is way down the road when she gets captured by the White Tower, because their hypocrisy is so much more glaring than her own, because hers is more of a personal thing, and theirs is ideological and political and is literally destroying the world. So the way she's able to stand up to the tower and point out their hypocrisy while maintaining her own strength of character and position is one of the better scenes in the whole series. And I'm glad Jordan got to it before his death. Because a lot of that happens in Knife of Dreams, which was the last book he wrote.
Well, I think another part of it, her character that grates at me a little bit is from understanding personality types and specifically your more sociopathic personality types. She's quite Machiavellian. She is very much an ends justify the means,
Hmm.
very much rules for thee and not for me. Uh, Now she hides it because she knows she'll lose that part, but she very much climbs the ladder through that kind of mindset where we
Yeah,
talk about,
that is her greatest failing that's never really overcome. Um,
but it's
and
also why she's successful.
yeah, and that's fine. You don't have to have characters overcome all their flaws. They can be flawed characters to the end. That helps keep them interesting, even if unsympathetic. But where she's so different from like a Galad is working out what is right. And then when he acts, he's convinced he's right. We know from her perspective, she knows what's right and she knows what she's doing isn't.
Mm-hmm.
She knows
Well,
she's breaking the rules. She knows she's lying.
let's take it to Nynaeve though, where the difference is because she bullies her way forward,
Yes.
but at the same time she stays consistent to herself.
Yeah.
She if she thinks she's doing wrong, she either clamps shut like she did in her argument,
Mhm.
or she kind of just stubbornly backs off, or at some point eventually we do see her admit she's wrong or get down on herself because of it, but she's always trying to push forward with her own uh again, like you said, concept of right, that what's the right thing to do, and am I doing it the right way?
Mhm. Yeah. But she still knows she's doing wrong. I mean, the big one is that point of view of hers where she's just got done bullying Nynaeve and her eyes pop open and she's basically thinking, holy crap, I can't believe I got away with that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if you don't have anything else to the comments, then
Yep, to the comments.
all right. So now thank you, Frank, for chiming in on my behalf, but I can also do see where Scott and you are coming from when it comes to Egwene, because she does change the White Tower quite significantly, but you don't necessarily see those changes in the series. It's you can understand how going forward into the next age, the tower is going to be quite different, and Cadsuin is probably going to be able to rule more effectively and rule more to her personality because of the things that Egwene set up, because of the changes that she made, um, that that weren't necessarily as immediately drastic or as immediately noticeable, but she did set the stage for a lot of change. Even if she herself kind of backtracked a little bit.
uh the Jylin and Thera comment, which is I agree with that, and that was the problem to
Mm,
me because there were so many instances in the book where it impacted what happened, but there's no
yeah.
history or because pretty much after that point when they get together, he makes every decision he makes based on her,
Yes.
and that affects everything else around them because he's kind of not a super integral part, but he's at least enough of a
Yeah.
factor that it shapes part of the story. And when we have a part of his story that is shaping his part of the story, maybe a little bit of fleshing it out might have been handy. And again, as we talked about in that episode, I believe it wouldn't have taken much.
No, it like again back to this scene with Egwene is the overwhelming majority of that chapter is Nynaeve's perspective, but in order to give us another perspective, in order to give us a more about Egwene, because something kind of pivotal important just happened with her bullying Nynaeve and taking charge there. So now Jordan needs to flesh that out more with Egwene. So rather than giving her a full chapter, we just switched to her perspective for the last 4 or 5 pages of that chapter. And it I think would have enriched the story if throughout these sections with Nyneave and Elayne, he would have done that with Tom and Julian. Let's, here are the girls. Here is, just as a quick example, when after Elayne and Nyneave have their argument, and then Nyneave shouts up at Tom of, slow down, you fool. Are you trying to break our necks or something to that effect? And you could have switched to Tom just for a few pages of his reaction to that, how he's viewing the women and his place there. Because really, for a very long time, all we get about Tom in his personality and motivations are
the Stone of Tear thoughts.
The stone, yeah, the setup for when Moiraine goes to cajole him into going with the girls in the first place. And it would have been good to just flesh all that out a little bit more, reinforce it as we go, which again is what he does with Egwene here. He's reinforcing things as we go along rather than waiting for, half a dozen chapters or more before we get a full Egwene perspective chapter.
And you don't even need that much. Like you brought up one instance there, another one you brought up last time, which I thought was good. Having a short little snippet of them planning to break the girls out.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be with every moment. Just, 2 in this book would have been enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're about to get, we stopped off, and where we'll pick up next time are 2 chapters that are basically tangents, or several tangents of smaller stories that he's going to jump back to real quick and say, hey, remember this stuff? This is still going on. Remember these people? This is what they're doing. All right. Well, that's all I have, except to thank Scott for agreeing with me about the pigeons. Yeah. To me, those are the most logical conclusions for those. But again, it's why it's so great to reread, because he leaves things hanging. There are a few points where, I guess whenever we finally get to the very end of this incredibly long series, we'll probably talk about some of these things that we feel are significant hanging plot threads. But he purposely leaves us small little threads hanging because he wants to leave some mystery and speculation there. Like these pigeons are never really addressed. We can just kind of guess that, okay, well, this second one is heading west. We know that the Makura woman shows up helping the Sanshin make fork root. So she was probably inadvertently helping a Sanshin agent, and then later became a Sanshin collaborator because of what happened to her. But we don't really know. He never really tells us. I mean, he just barely mentions, to the point where I'd forgotten until you looked up in the cheater spoiler book there and reminded me that, oh yeah, she shows up later, or is mentioned later, but it's just in passing, which is part of the fun of the books, of trying to dig out all those little nuggets.
Yeah, because even then you're just like, that name looks familiar, and you keep reading.
Yeah.
Especially if it's your first read.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I have. Next time we'll zip through the next couple of chapters, and then we'll get back to Rand, where I won't say the big stuff happens. I think it's really going to set up the big stuff of what happens next, of the battle in front of Karheen. Is we probably won't get to that yet, because there's quite a bit of setup there. And we will finally get to sexy time with Rand and Avienda, which
I have a meme for that.
Which I'm still on the fence about if I'm going to rant or not, because I still feel like that kind of comes out of nowhere. Giggity.
Again, sexual tension can. There's a lot of things going on there that could explain it. Now, obviously, you're like we were a teenage boy reader. wouldn't have picked up on them, but having been through some relationships in our lives, and I'm assuming at least one or two kind of sparked out of nowhere. That it's easy to see where it comes from. Now, it being like your permanent love, one of your permanent love relationships throughout the series, that makes it a little different. But uh, we're given a hint that they spend so much time together,
Yeah.
and if you're him, you're kind of trying to ignore the boner you got in your pants. And if you're her, obviously she's feeling something, but she's trying to suppress it because of and we have to account for the fact that she might have, as we learn the maidens do, uh, taken the initiative beforehand had she not had that obligation.
That's a good point. Yeah. So that's probably what we'll end next time, just from my vague recollection of the next sequence of chapters. That's probably where we'll end next time and spend a bit of time on, because it's a big deal for Rand's character, of what happens there. So we'll try and get to that and end on that next time, and we'll see y'all then.
All right, no disclaimers needed. We didn't give any advice that I
I'll
know
give you
of.
some advice. Read the damn books.
Read the damn books.
If you're not already, I don't know what you're doing here.
And and we'll be back at it next time with probably some COVID stuff.
I'm gonna have to rant about baseball because it's pissing me off.
You'll have to take lead on that because I don't really watch it because apparently I'm a commie. And
Clearly.
I've got more nutrition thoughts because we didn't get nearly as in depth as I wanted to. The COVID stuff should be quick because I just ran some numbers to kind of tease on just basically all the data we have up to this point for the 50 states. Because when we're looking at what we should have been doing, what we did do, who was right, who was wrong, and it's not like we haven't had time pass and millions of data points at this point. So the shorter answer is yeah, there was no perfect strategy. So
all right, well, we'll get into that next time, which will, I don't know, probably the weekend is when we'll get to record that.
Not this weekend. I'm going to be in Lavernia again, or in San Antonio, because we're going to see Rammstein.
All right, well, then we'll get to it when we get to it.
All right, later.